very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. India and the European Union on Wednesday adopted a joint declaration on moving towards a more circular economic model that provides for reduction in primary resource consumption and enhances the use of secondary raw materials. The declaration was adopted at a virtual summit of the leaders of the two sides that resolved to significantly expand bilateral economic engagement, recognizing that post-COVID-19 recovery priorities offer opportunities to unleash the full potential for trade and investment ties. The 27-nation EU is India's largest trading partner for goods with trade exceeding $100 billion. The bloc is one of the largest investors in India with cumulative investment of over $91 billion. The EU is also an important source for technology, innovation and best practices for India. In the summit, the two sides also decided to set up a high-level dialogue to address the trade irritants and improving conditions for traders and investors on both sides, as well as discuss supply chain linkages. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the India-EU Virtual Summit. Joining me on the program today are Elizabeth Brock, Senior Research Fellow, Royal United Services Institute, UK, Mohan Kumar, former Ambassador, and Professor Swaran Singh, Chairperson, Centre for International Politics, JNU. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. What were the key takeaways and the key highlights for you from the virtual summit between India and the EU?
So, thank you very much for having me on the program. What I see is enormous strategic convergence between the two sides, which is not new, but I do see it now extending to a lot of areas. I would underline the following. One is the inclusion of maritime cooperation is significant. There is a reference to Indo-Pacific, but there is also a reference to Indian Ocean and the Pacific. So I will not get into terminology, but I think with France, when I was ambassador, we had started a maritime dialogue between India and France. So I see the beginnings of maritime cooperation between EU and India. And if that goes further, that's excellent. I would point you to the civil nuclear deal, which has taken a long time happening, but it's finally happened between EU and India. And finally, just the usual suspects like organized crime, terrorism, cooperation between Europol and CBI. So that is the strategic picture. The second takeaway for me is trade and investment. I'm absolutely delighted that there will now be ministerial level high-level dialogue to supervise progress. I would have been happier if there was an end date to these negotiations, because we've spent a lot of time already talking about the BTIA. I would have liked the leaders to say 2023, you jolly well finish this agreement. I would have liked it personally. But the fact that ministers are going to be involved is good. Last takeaway, sustainable development, technology, research in vaccines, public health. I think those are areas in which India constantly underestimates EU. As you rightly said, and I'm grateful to you, you are saying EU is a tech leader. And it's a huge powerhouse of technology and innovation. I sometimes got the feeling when I was ambassador in Paris that we should take more advantage of it. There is a constant underestimation of both sides. EU thinks that India is not reforming fast enough, not so attractive compared to China. And India constantly feels that EU has got soft power, but not hard powers. Therefore, we look to United States. I think this summit should demonstrate the length and breadth of the areas in which India and EU can see eye to eye. So I'm extremely happy. And there will be comparisons with the summit that happened with China a month ago, in which there was no joint statement. So we not only have a joint statement, but we also have a roadmap for the period 2020 to 2025. So all in all, extremely pleased, but a lot of hard work by diplomats to carry through the vision of the leaders. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Elizabeth Broad, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. Let me take this point that the ambassador was making forward. He spoke about how there was a similar summit between EU and China earlier, of course, less than a month ago. And there wasn't really a joint statement that came out of that particular summit. With all that has been going on between EU and China, what role do you see India playing as far as the EU is concerned? How important is India for the EU now, considering how the global situation is?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Frank. This is really India's moment. We can't underestimate, or we can't overstate, I should say, the significance of these past few months, the impact of these past few months on China's reputation globally. It has been secretive, it has obfuscated the origins of coronavirus, the spread of coronavirus, it has exploited other countries' weakness as a result of coronavirus, it has used its very modest coronavirus assistance to other countries for propaganda purposes. So the sort of ugly side of China that was there before coronavirus has all of a sudden become completely obvious to everybody, even those who wish that China would become a country just like ours. And that leaves relations between China and the EU at a very low point. Which country will risk developing closer ties with China under such circumstances? And we have to add countries that dare express any sort of hesitation regarding Huawei are immediately punished by Chinese diplomats. So in comes India, and as Ambassador said, it's notable that in the China-EU summit there was no final statement, whereas with the summit there was one. And I think it illustrates that actually the EU and EU member states are keen to develop closer ties with India, because you can't just sort of give up or limit relations with one country. Your economy will hurt. And I'm not saying that India should just be some sort of substitute to China, but actually it could become the prime candidate for much closer relations, economic relations, and as a result, other closer cooperation in other areas, including academia, as this sort of plates shift, and China really will have to get used to more limited cooperation with the EU.
Okay, all right. So, talking about the EU, Professor, let's not forget that there are 25 odd individual nations as well. It's a bloc at the end of the day. So, but individual nations will have their own interests as well. So how united is the EU, and how do we look at the relationship with the EU? Do we look at it bilaterally as well, or keep it at a multilateral level? And, what's to say that China might not just, try to get on someone else's side. For instance, Italy, for one, is definitely moving away from the prescribed norms.
Thank you, Frank, for bringing this very interesting issue up for discussion. Indeed, it's a kind of a challenge to Indian foreign policy. And if you recall, until early 1990s, India was not even considering European Union as a unit. It's only since then, when India started opening up and we started looking at European Union. Of course, European Union also was gradually evolving over a period of time. But I think today, there's a clear understanding of European Union being a very important entity, despite some of the internal disjunctions, Brexit and others. But European Union is a very, very potent player in global affairs now. And it brings in a lot of norms, institutions, morality, human rights. These issues are very significant agenda on European Union. So I think that's a first point that we in India need to understand, that even if we have very strong bilateral relations, at least with some of the bigger powers in European Union, but European Union as an entity is very significant to us. And once we begin to understand that, it is immediately very clear that European Union is the largest trading partner of India, bigger than United States, bigger than China. It's also largest investor in India, about $60 billion compared to $50 billion of United States, about $26 billion of Chinese. Likewise, the trade last figures for 2018 to 19 is $116 billion for European Union, $92 billion for the United States, and about $94 billion for China. So once we begin to understand even the economic significance, both in trade and investment, I think then looking at European Union, where we repeatedly hear Indian leaders saying we share principles and we share the values of democracy, of rule of law, of plurality, of all other things. But beneath these broad principles and shared values, is hardcore interest of trade, of investment, of education, as Elizabeth just mentioned. She's speaking from London about 35 to 40,000 students India sends to Britain every year, compared to about 17,000 to China so far. So it's a very different relationship, I want to underline. And therefore, I think even the comparison with China is the economic powerhouse, no doubt. And European Union has again repeatedly said that there are different strengths that both India and China have, and they'll engage both of us. For example, repeatedly European leaders have had difficulties with India's, let's say, for better word, conservatism, or sort of the tariffs of India, or even protectionism that they see in India. They have issues with India, and which we have to resolve some of those issues. Those may be very different when it comes to China. But fundamentally, India's elites are so comfortable with European countries simply not because we were colonized, but because successive generations have gone for education in Europe. So India's comfort with European Union is higher at emotional level. European Union's emotional level comfort with India is relatively less. But my last 10 seconds, European Union today sees India as a very important, significant market. And India sees European Union source of both finance and technology, particularly in post-COVID-19, the regeneration of both wealth and health for our citizens. And that is why democracy has become a very important template to talk about cooperation between these two sides.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ambassador, taking the discussion forward and talking about resolving issues, one long-standing issue has been an FTA. It was in discussion, I think about 7 years ago in 2013, then it went on the back burner. And now yet again, last week, we heard the Commerce Minister, in fact, talking about it and saying that, there is something that is being done and something is being worked out. What are some of the sticking issues as far as the FTA is concerned? And do you see something being worked out anytime in the near future?
So I was indirectly involved with the broad-based trade and investment agreement between EU and India. I can be honest in this program, I don't think I'm betraying any secret when I say that we were this close to settling the deal. And one of the biggest mistakes that both sides made, and I'm not apportioning blame, is not to seal this agreement. The agreement finally fell through because of some, I'm putting it in a very oversimplified fashion, on French wine and on German autos. It's a great pity. I love French wine, full disclosure, but it's a pity that we allowed the French and the Germans to do this, and India had its own issues, of course. So the first point I want to make is, the good news is the two ministers will not be starting from zero. There has been a lot of work which is already done. The more difficult news is that we've got new issues on the table, and one of them will be e-commerce. Electronic commerce will be an important aspect. There has already been an FTA signed between EU and Vietnam. So European Union will find it very difficult to justify that the agreement they signed with India is going to be substantially different from the one they have signed with Vietnam. Although I wouldn't compare, because India is a much bigger market. So the broad terms of the new agreement will be that India will look for data safety and secure status, which is very important for India. India can fall back on the GDPR, as they call it in Europe, the data regulatory framework, which I think India finds much more suitable than the Chinese model or the American model. And if we can decide on a few other things which have to do with tariffs, intellectual property rights, and non-trade issues like labor standards and human rights, on which Europe attaches a lot of importance. So this is the broad basket of issues. I frankly think that these issues are not beyond resolution. They will take a little bit of time, but I do not believe we should take more than a couple of years, frankly, because time is running out. EU has signed an FTA with Japan. EU has signed an FTA with Vietnam. Vietnam and India compete in some areas, and India will find it more and more difficult to export to EU if there are going to be FTA concessions given to Vietnam, and if there are concessions given to Bangladesh and Pakistan on the basis of least developed countries and GSP plus. So just out of self-interest, India will have to rush and make sure we conclude a broad-based trade and investment agreement. One last point, investment is a very, very key issue. We will have to remodel our investment agreement because our role, our role model of a BT, of an investment agreement has got simply no takers, frankly. So we will have to find a way to refashion a new investment agreement so that European investors can be given satisfaction. So Frank, to answer your question, eminently doable. The question is, you need political will. You need to do it as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think, speed is of essence as far as the FTA is concerned, and we need to work it out sooner rather than later before somebody else beats us to it, is what the ambassador is suggesting. Elizabeth Brock, let me bring you to the picture now, and let's talk about another issue, an issue that has been dominating headlines in Europe over the last few years, the issue of Brexit. Has the European Union as a bloc and the UK, of course, gotten over the hangover of Brexit and now looking for new avenues and, new agendas, really, as far as their relations with the rest of the world is concerned?
Yeah, Brexit is the gift that keeps on giving. It just keeps being delayed. But now the UK is supposed to leave the single market at the end of this year, which is really, well, for many it's a tragedy, of course, but it's now happening, even though it's a bit improvised because we're all in coronavirus mode still. But I think as far as India is concerned, that is an opportunity because the UK is now looking desperately for new close cooperation partners, and India has of course been a very close ally of the UK since the very beginning. But the Commonwealth is, as you know, the bloc, for lack of a better word, that the UK government keeps talking about when the discussion comes up. Well, what is going to replace the EU? Then the Commonwealth is the answer. I don't think the Commonwealth can replace the EU, but the intention is very much there in the UK government to focus its efforts on improving, increasing, vastly expanding trade and other cooperation with the Commonwealth. And I would flag up in particular with India the high-tech sector and academia, which are two sectors incidentally where cooperation has until now been very strong with China, but where there is rapidly increasing uncertainty or anguish about whether that is the right avenue considering the actions of the Chinese government.
Okay, all right. So, Professor, let me bring in another aspect now, something that the ambassador raised in his opening remark about how EU is a technological hub and something that we can, harness really as far as we are concerned. But as far as technology and innovation, how open is the EU to share cutting edge technology and to share information with other countries?
I think we have to look this in terms of relative access that India has around the world. So if you look at what are the main sources for technology transfer other than Soviet Union and now Russia, I think comparing this to United States, India's access to technology from European Union will be relatively easier. As I mentioned, several earlier projects of cooperation have been going on. So, for instance, when Euratom signs an agreement now on this Tuesday with the Atomic Energy Department for cooperation on civilian use of nuclear energy, this is not the first time they are doing it. India was partner in Euratom for about a decade plus. So, lot of tradition of India's technical cooperation with several of these countries, both at bilateral level, now increasingly at the multilateral level, is clearly, I think, an easier access for technology to India. And I think I want to particularly underline the nature of technologies is very futuristic. For example, they are looking at cooperation in sectors like biodiversity, renewable energy, solar alliance, And green technologies, blue economy related technologies, ocean explorations, maritime dialogue was just mentioned. So the nature of collaboration and not simple transfer of technology, I think, is what needs to be underlined. It's a very different partnership that we then bring to the table. And anything that India does with European Union immediately brings India to the international global platform. It doesn't happen easily when you have our partnerships going on with other countries. That's largely in a bilateral format. Given the nature of European Union, anything that you begin to talk about and discuss and then work with the European Union becomes global in nature automatically in that sense.
Starting first with the ambassador, are there any areas of concern in the relationship between EU and India? What is it that we need to focus on going forward?
So I wouldn't say big areas of concern, but among friends, if the European Union has concerns about some shortfalls in India's democracy, on India's human rights situation, on India's labor, environmental standards, I think we should take their criticism in a constructive spirit. I think India is now a mature enough country not to be prickly about criticism coming from our friends. So I wouldn't consider EU saying something about some laws we have passed. If they have concerns, address it honestly as we can. And I'm sure EU will appreciate it. But I want to conclude by also pointing out one other thing. Whichever way you look at it, and if you agree with the conventional wisdom that the liberal international order is coming to a close, if you are heading towards a multipolar world, EU is one of the most important poles. And it is in India's fundamental interest to make sure that we have the largest amount of convergence with this strategic pole. The other area where we should have an honest discussion is about China. You see, we may have our own concerns about China, and we would have expressed it during the bilateral meetings, but to expect EU to completely fall in line with India's view on China would be unrealistic, because EU has a much bigger trade investment relationship with China. So you will have to give them some time and space to reduce their dependence, offer attractive opportunities to EU so that EU can look at India as some kind of an alternative, although we can't replace China overnight. But I think the fact that we have common values, common interests, strategic convergence should make for a better trade investment relationship. It goes back to what I always say, it is the economy stupid, frankly. At the end of the day, you have to get your broad-based trade and investment agreement as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Since we are here and since the ambassador brought this up, Elizabeth, what role do you see the EU playing in a post-COVID scenario?
The EU is, well, used to be seen as I think the ambassador pointed out earlier, as an important alliance bloc, a group of countries, but one that was mostly focused on soft power. And that may still be the case. The EU is still not a sort of a military alliance of any worth at all, really, even though it has a sort of a military dimension. But what has happened in the meantime is that the United States has declined in significance. That shift has been radical in the past 3 years or so, which means a larger role for the EU. Now that the EU's most significant leader, Angela Merkel, is about to leave office. She leaves next year. We don't know whether Emmanuel Macron will win re-election. So we may see those standard bearers of EU power leave office together, and that would weaken the EU. But regardless of who is the office holder, I think the reality is that American power has declined. Chinese power has not declined, but Chinese reputation has definitely declined, and with that, countries' willingness to work closely with China. And we should remember that the the UK just this week reversed its decision to include Huawei in 5G. A very big step by the UK, and also this week the Italian government wrote 5G regulations in such a way that Huawei is effectively excluded. So this is a country that was the country in the EU that was China's main target for friendship. So I see lots of opportunities for India to engage primarily in a commercial way with the EU, because it will emerge stronger, not as a result maybe of its own energy, but as a result of the decline of the US and the declining reputation of China.
All right, and Professor, close the show for us with your quick concluding remark on the best way forward.
Clearly, COVID-19 was on the mind of both sides during this 15th summit that happened on 15th of July online. And clearly, 1.5 paragraph of the joint statement is devoted to this issue of healthcare. How two sides will explore opportunities of working together to find that antidote vaccine for this problem, to diagnostics and other sectors related to the healthcare. So health and prosperity is both the focus, I think, of this particular summit meeting. And I want you to underline the fact that you remember Prime Minister Vajpayee had once described India and United States as natural allies. Prime Minister Modi has called India and EU as natural partners. I think that says a lot of the vision that India has as to how India views European Union and how it wishes to engage European Union, where the relationship is much more normative, much more mutual, much more equal, much more voluntary. So, for instance, the trade itself is so much more balanced compared to either India-United States trade or India-China trade is, of course, worse.
Right.
So it's a very different relationship is what you need to understand. And very often our audience don't really appreciate that our relationship with the European Union is the most important relationship compared to, of course, our relationship with Britain, France, or Germany, which is also important. But we keep viewing the European Union in the old lens of, looking at just major Western European powers. Europe, 27 nations are a big, powerful grid today. And I think post-COVID-19, particularly to push forward the normative side of human-face globalization. And I think that is where the role that the European Union will play would see India standing together along with the European Union to make sure this is a human-focused development, human-focused globalization that follows COVID-19, and no single nation is allowed to monopolize the future trend following COVID-19.
Okay, all right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that India and the EU are natural partners. We share a very special relationship, one of mutual respect. And what we're going to focus on going forward is health and prosperity. There are certain irritants as far as the relationship is concerned, but nothing serious. These need to be discussed and sorted out, and we shouldn't be prickly about issues raised by our friends, is what the panelists are suggesting. Also, don't expect the EU to take India's line as far as China is concerned, but that having been said, India continues to be an important partner for the EU, and opportunities are going to galore in the future to come. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.